Yes, hello. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here with Paul Pulé, and he's one of the co-authors of the book Ecological Masculinities that is going to be launched by Bambual here in Brazil in August. And he wrote this book together with Martin. We had a conversation with Martin last week. You can check it in the YouTube too. It's already available, the link. And I'm Luiz, I'm from Brotherhood. It's a men's group in Brazil that started in 2017. That's the book, Paul is showing it. Yeah, the book in English. And Brotherhood started in 2017, and we aim to gather men around the conversations about masculinities, the challenges we face in the world today, how to be a man today. And that's what brought me to the book, my interest in the book. I find this book very important for the moment right now. And that's why I'm very happy to be here with Paul today. And I thank him for being available and offering his time to be with us here. And Paul, I just wanted to let you introduce yourself, whatever you want to say about you. And also, if you want to start telling us where you are on the earth, where are your body touching the ground, and also your motivation for studying masculinities. I know you have a big background studying it, and what you want to share with us, your motivation to engage in this subject.
Yeah, well, firstly, thank you so much. It's a real privilege to be here. I had a chance to spend some time walking in the forest with Martin Hultman, who I'm assuming at least some people on the call will have joined the call with him last week. And he spoke very fondly of all of the efforts that have been put into bringing us to this call and helping us interact with folks in Brazil. And boy, what a time in your country's history and on the planet's, in the history of the planet for us to be doing this work. And I think that one of the things that's the most exciting for me about doing this work is actually seeing how it's being picked up and made its own and made relevant in different parts of the world and in different cultures. And so I just feel really touched and honored actually that that there is a translation now in Portuguese, and that through that translation we are able to support people to develop more caring masculinities in many different parts of the world and different cultures, and in this case in Brazil. And of course, because Brazil has such a huge role to play in often being thought of as the lungs of the earth, with the Amazon in particular, and the interactions between more modern culture in Brazil and the indigenous culture and the collisions there. There's been a lot of attention, I think, rightly so, focused on the kind of impacts that industrialization have on the planet in very negative ways right in Brazil. So it's a real pleasure for me that we're able to have this conversation. Where I am right now is not so far away. I'm in New York City. I'm actually in the apartment of my uncle, my dad's brother. He lives here and has lived here for many years, and he and I are very close. We're more like brothers actually. And so it's a real delight for me to be here. And part of the reason I'm here is to support him going through a back surgery recovery. And because I'm between academic contracts at the minute, I'm basically spending some time freelance as an educator and a scholar. I'm spending a lot of time writing and putting grants together and doing educations like this and talks like this. So I think the thing I want to say about why I do this work is probably start by telling a story about my life in Western Australia, which is where I was born and raised. I am of Mediterranean heritage. I talk about my heritage as being Mediterranean. I'm part Lebanese, part Italian, part Maltese, and our family came from that Mediterranean region to Western Australia after the Second World War as war refugees. And I think that being the first generation born in Australia really gave me a very visceral and embodied sense of cultural collision, oppression issues, and the ways that masculinities play out in both very caring and very destructive ways, especially when there's different pressures placed on individuals who find themselves in roles of responsibility, particularly heads of household. Mediterranean culture, which I'm sure actually plays out in the Latin culture of Brazil, also is very male-dominated, very masculinist, to use the technical term. And I certainly come from a family heritage that is very similar. And one of the things that I noticed as a young person was how much I longed to be close with the men in my family, but also how difficult it was to have that closeness other than a lot of bravado and a lot of show and a lot of one-upsmanship and a lot of proving to family and to the world that our family members had made it good in the new country. And that brought with it also not just an enormous amount of work pressure, but also then pressure on the family that played out mostly through violence. There was quite a lot of domestic violence in my family, extended family, as well as in my immediate family. And that was really quite confusing to me, because I also come from an incredibly loving family, a family that's, in your very classic Latin sense, culturally oriented towards big meals, extended relationships with family members that go deep and long, really caring for each other, sharing resources, and really giving each other a hand. So the juxtaposition between those two presences, if you like, those two ways of being in my family dynamic when I was young was really quite confusing. And it really compelled me to ask big, deep questions about what's happening for the men in my family from a very early age. And that was juxtaposed against the women members of my family being incredibly loving, caring, even encouraging me to be a little bit naughty, as a child, to take some risks. And being washed with incredible rich foods and a lot of adoration and encouragement to be myself. And that also was an interesting tension, an interesting juxtaposition between the way I felt around the women family members in my life, my grandmothers and my cousins and aunts, versus uncles, dad, grandfathers. And mixed in with all of that was one of my grandfathers, who I'm named after, was very gentle and kind and patient and willing to celebrate me being myself in a way that many of the other men in my family were not so easy. It wasn't so easy for them to show that, even though I know they felt that. And so the place where I ended up getting a sense of that love and affection the most from most of the male members of my family were when I was building things with them in the backyard, because we did a lot of carpentry work together, common for migrant families, and then also growing food. And then a third place where that played out was with my father. Also, at quite a young age, I joined the Boy Scouts, and my father became the Scout leader. And he was, he had a lot of attention and availability to really teach me things and show me things at a young age in those spaces in particular, that really gave me a sense of safety and trust in the earth. It was like, things can be a bit crazy in the family dynamic, but when I'm with the men in my family in these contexts, things seem actually softer, more spacious, more caring. And I think that was really what bred my interest in environmental issues as well, was that juxtaposition between those two ways of being in with my family. On the one hand, being quite scary and risky, and on the other hand, really loving and rich. Yeah, I might stop there and just let you see where you want to go with that. There's many more things that I could say, but that's probably a good start.
Yeah, that's perfect. That's perfect. And I just wanted to ask you, like, you described a lot of how this hegemonic masculinity plays part in your history, and I think many men here that are listening us, and also all the women and all the people. And so I'll just go direct to the question: what is ecological masculinity, and how the performance of masculinity is related to ecology? How is it like directly affecting these issues that you presented? Like here in Brazil, we are facing this Amazon drama, and also all our political leaders in a way reproduce this same pattern. So what is this proposal that you are putting in the book, like presenting to us, and how do you see that masculinity affects, like plays a role in the crisis that we are facing today?
No, I'll just turn that off. I'm sorry, I forgot to turn off a messenger app. Yes, so I presume that Martin, I haven't looked at the recording from Martin's presentation, so for those that are on the call, forgive me if this is a repetition. But in the original work, the first book in 2018, which you have just translated and is being distributed, it will have a different cover, obviously, and will be in Portuguese. In this first book, what we did was we presented a frame for 3 types of masculinities. Now, I'll start by saying that this is an oversimplification. We actually argue that masculine identity, first and foremost, is present in everybody. So the conversation that we had in this first book was not just about men, but about social constructions of masculinities as they are present in everybody. So that's the first really important point to make. And the second point is that the 3-part frame that we presented in this book was a way of trying to unpack the complexity of those different ways of people showing masculine identities in their life. So whether you're a genderqueer person, whether you're in a woman's body, whether you're in a man's body, masculine social constructions are certain sets of behaviors that are actually taught to us and are rewarded in different kinds of ways by the social structures, both on local, national, and international levels. And some of those constructions are rewarded very favorably, and some of those constructions are actually marginalized or put down. And what we've tried to show with the 3 categorizations: industrial breadwinner masculinity, think Bolsonaro as an example, and all of the people around Bolsonaro, all of the people who vote for him are basically bought into a particular kind of masculinity being the way the world should be, right? And then there's a second category called eco-modern masculinities. And eco-modern masculinities, the good example that we like to hold out is Justin Trudeau from Canada, or Emmanuel Macron from France, but also some women leaders. Angela Merkel, up until recently, was Chancellor in Germany. We also had Theresa May recently in the UK in senior leadership positions. I can think of several politicians in my home, Australia, that fit that category as well, who happen to be in women's bodies, that show a degree of care, a willingness to reform or come up with regulatory policies, but are still bought into a very hierarchical system that, broadly speaking, we think of as capitalism. It's a winner-takes-all kind of model. It's very neo as well as social Darwinist in its approach. So it's very much an approach of the survival of the fittest. The ones that are the strongest float to the top. And your job once you're in the top is, if you are in a generous place, to provide some marginal benefits to those below you through trickle-down economics, which is the classic reference point for capitalism. And what we know is that both those models, the most obscene versions, Bolsonaro and Trump, for example, were unapologetic about that model, and we have these more regulatory folks who are bought into this model, are willing to soften it or greenwash it. So it's a difference between a very industrial or gray, think in terms of color, think gunmetal gray industrial breadwinner, and think light green eco-modern, right? So these 2 categories, one's kind of a nicer version of the other, if that makes sense. And then the third category, ecological masculinities. And what we propose with ecological masculinities is that, firstly, again, these masculinities are present in everybody. And the worst actors are the people who bolt onto these first two categories, who happen to be in men's bodies, mostly global northern, mostly very owning class or wealthy, mostly white, mostly male, and mostly willing to put their boot on the throat of most other living things and other people in order to keep themselves at the top of the pile. So ecological masculinities is first and foremost about exposing the folly of those two other categories. And secondly, it's about saying, actually, if you look at the historical trajectory of human beings as a species, what we see is that human beings have been incredibly caring towards each other for millennia because they had to for each other's survival. In fact, part of what has brought us to our dominance over the planet is that we're incredibly cooperative, and we're incredibly relational, and we're incredibly caring towards each other, especially when we allow ourselves to be. And so ecological masculinities is really about untapping that and bringing us back to what our core caring essence. And it's not intended to be a panacea or a solve-all for everybody and everything. It's intended to be one little piece in a broad mosaic of deep green awareness of building a deep, intimate relationship with the earth, that ecofeminism as one discourse, as deep ecology as another discourse, as social ecology as a third discourse, as feminist care theory as a fourth, as critical studies in men and masculinities, these influences that we drew on have all demonstrated. And so it's intended to be an add-on to those wider conversations to really bring the masculinities aspect of all of these conversations about deep earth care right into the spotlight.
Yes, no, thank you so much for that answer, because I have so many questions now that I could take from that.
Right.
But I'll start, like, in the book, you talk a lot about this plurality in masculinity. So, like, ecological masculinity is always is a path to take that you present, and it could be very pluralistic. And in a sense, what I wanted to ask now, what you said about capitalism and this structure, the winner takes all, like our society, it encourages individualism.
Yes.
So we live like more apart, even more. And considering like questions like race, gender, the nature, so we tend to dominate that. There is this culture still. And I know that you lived in a community, so
yes.
There in the US, right?
Yeah, that's right, in Pennsylvania. Yep.
Yeah, and I wanted to know, like, how do you see the role of communities in these ecological masculinities, and if groups of men could be a start for that? So, like, how could we improve or encourage the formation of communities, and if that could help, like, in foment or improve like the application of ecological masculinities?
Yeah, look, I'll start by saying a little bit about what my belief is based on tracking the climate data for about the last arguably 30 years. I started looking at the climate science probably in the early 1990s, before as I was getting into undergraduate school. And the thing that's really present for me about the climate data is that I think it's reasonable to say that we've probably missed the crucial window to turn back from catastrophic ecological, social, economic, and geopolitical crises. We're already seeing the consequences of that unfolding, even though we're not yet at 2 degrees. And we're likely to get to 2 degrees global temperature rise between now and the end of the century. And so what we're seeing is the death of life as we have known it on the planet by 1,000 cuts. So it's a change here, a change there, a catastrophic situation here, a breakdown in a society, a community there, a large storm causing a disruption. And these are cumulative changes that I no longer am of the view that it is useful to invest in trying to prevent, because even if we stopped producing carbon I'm saying particularly holding the global north most accountable here, of course. Brazil has its own responsibility, especially around deforestation and the burning of those forests, both the combination of the loss of the lung, the destruction of the lung, but then also the release of the carbon. That in and of itself, even though you're not as industrialized there as many of the global northern nations, what we see is that it is pointless to try to prevent the knock-on effects of having ignored the symptoms since the 1970s, which is when we really needed to begin to act. And so what I'm most interested in doing is investing in supporting people to develop the best skills to be the most caring human beings, to operate on the most localized of levels, to be able to support each other through the transitions that are now upon us and will continue to worsen and are unavoidable. So not all of my colleagues share quite that extreme a view. Some are still of the view that there is an opportunity for mitigation. I am more focused on climate adaptation through ecological masculinities. And I think that what we will see through that breaking down process that is happening all over the planet is that people will necessarily become more and more localized. And so the onus then is on each of us to really develop as deeply caring relationships with ourselves, with each other, and in many heteronormative cases, that's our families, our immediate, particularly in Latin cultures, extended families, with our localized communities and with the geopolitical situation that we have the most control over. And that includes things like localizing food production, sharing of technological innovations. There is a technique that was spoken about by a academic influence of mine that I have some criticisms about, Murray Bookchin, who was the founder of social ecology, talked about the localization of municipalities. He referred to it as municipal libertarianism. I have some problems with libertarianism as a political concept because it's so hyper-individualist. But the way that Bookchin actually talked about municipal libertarianism was the localizing and the more autonomizing of local communities as the global systems that we're used to having break down. Now, this is going to be exacerbated, of course, by war. We're seeing examples of that in particular in Europe between Ukraine and Russia, and the maneuvering of the Western allies in the NATO and the NATO forces behind the scenes to try to hold everything together. The reason that that conflict was not shut down immediately, and the reason that NATO has not implemented the kind of sanctions that would really have stopped the Russian invasion of Ukraine is because the powers that be on the NATO side of that conflict are also deeply invested in keeping the system as held together as possible. In other words, it's another example of what happened in 2008 and 2009 during the global financial crisis. There was the manipulation of these global systems to hold it together, when in reality, this was a clear sign that those systems were breaking down. And so that puts the onus on all of us to find ways to generate more care for ourselves in particular, first and foremost. If we're not caring of ourselves, we can't be authentically caring of others. Secondly, of those that are in our immediate lives, and then of our communities to be in service. And one of the ways that men in particular, I think, have an important role to play is because we very quickly go to living lives of service. We're very good at living lives of mission. What's my mission here in this lifetime, right? What's my purpose? What's my calling? And that's the place where I think men, in the way that we are raised, particularly in Latin cultures, have a real role to play, is how can your mission, your calling, be of service to the greater good, not just to yourself and those immediately around you, but to the wider communities that you are part of. And that would be my response to answer in light of what the climate science suggests is unavoidable.
Perfect, Paul. And you mentioned when you mentioned like the industrial breadwinners, you mentioned like Bolsonaro, Trump, and in eco-modern, like you said it, like quoted Angela Merkel or like many other Justin Trudeau.
Yeah.
Do you have like in work with men that I do, there is a very lack of references for men, like who should I look up to, who is my reference? And we always try to, like we should build, like we should be the references of each other. We try, but still there is this eagerness to find a reference. Do you see any reference right now? Like I see you and Martin as references for me right now, but yeah, but I don't know, like public figures or any other, or do you think that we should abolish this kind of reference? And like, I don't know, I wanted to know your thoughts about that.
I mean, such a great question. Those two models, industrial breadwinner and eco-modern, are very much about idealizing. And when we idealize, particularly in a, like a celebrity kind of way, we're actually, doing the same thing. My biggest influences, as I have personally ecologized, and I support others to individually ecologize in their own ways, the biggest influences have been the people that, and I suspect you and most of the listeners on this call will understand what I mean when I say this. It's actually the people that I have met that I just get a feeling that they have actually found a way to be in this life in true love. And what I mean by that is it's the understated person or the understated couple who I've met, who I've like, wow, there have been so few examples for me of a truly loving couple that I could tell have really found their peace with each other and themselves, as examples for me of what it is that we're reaching for. And typically that is where the male, we're talking heteronormative here, but it plays out actually in gay relationships and non-binary relationships as well, where the person who's the more masculine actually is not competing with or dominating or putting themselves above the person who's more feminized, but is actually finding ways to step towards with certain skills and then yield and let the other step towards and yield as well. And I have met, I could probably count on one hand in my lifetime, the couples that have really embodied that for me. It's a very rare experience, but it's an experience that I suspect many of you know what I'm talking about, where you just meet people and you're like, wow, there's something about them that actually feels safe, kind, respectful, understanding, honest, authentic, transparent. These are the kind of qualities that actually I think we should be looking for to model, to help us with role modeling. And those aren't necessarily qualities that you find in one particular person. But to jump to the other side, there's one example that I will give you that has been surprising for Martin and I use this example because Martin actually critiqued this particular individual at the beginning of his work in ecologizing. And that is Arnold Schwarzenegger as one iconographic individual. He's still, or granted, he's very grandfatherly now, but, when he was the governor of California, he very much greenwashed and, he was still driving around in those Hummers and was turning them electric and into using hydrogen fuel cells and really doing the greenwashing to work for his popularity. But when you listen to him now, what he talks about is, how can I, in my position of seniority and power and influence, support people like Greta Thunberg to promote her message even more? How can I take the worst actors to international court as climate criminals with my wealth and with my power? How can I support movies and films coming out that will educate the general populace about the climate crisis? Because I'm part of the movie industry and that has a lot of influence. And so Martin and I have actually tracked Arnold Schwarzenegger and were critical of Arnold Schwarzenegger as a greenwasher, as a classic eco-modern example like Trudeau and so forth. And what we did was that I supported Martin to write another chapter in our second book. This is the big fat one, which hasn't come out in Portuguese yet. And there's a chapter in here where Martin talks about Arnold Schwarzenegger's transition or his ecologization. And you will find, if you Google, and look, he's a controversial figure. he's, you know, had an affair, and, you know, that there are Me Too issues around him as an individual, and that those are not to be denied or ignored. And there's also examples of even he too, Mr. Muscle Man of the universe, Terminator, you know, extraordinaire, can actually develop a felt sense of what it means to be of service to the greater good, and to take responsibility, to show a degree of apology or you know, feeling accountable for his behavior, and going about the process of change. And so I don't look to individuals like that very much. I go looking more for the people on the street that are at a local level. But if you need an iconographic example, just because we wrote about him, I would say Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Yeah, perfect. What I take is that we shouldn't look for like specific people or persons, but like the actions or behaviors, they can change, and we can believe that people can change. So like Arnold Schwarzenegger is an example, he can change, and also the couple. So maybe they make mistakes in other areas, but there are some behaviors or some actions we could mirror or inspire. Yeah,
absolutely. Look, I'll say one other thing, because I had an experience at a conference about 2 years ago now that's actually quite relevant to this point, where, you know, it was a conference on the far, you know, how do we resist the far right's attempt to environmentalize? It was a responses to rising eco-fascism, right? And this conference, I gave a presentation, and obviously most of the people that were there were very far left in their politics, some people more far left than others. And I was talking about a way that I had spent lunch with a group of good old boys in New Zealand on lecture tour, who were asking me about, I was promoting the first book, and they were asking me about this book. And these were old guys that had made their you know, their wealth and were supporting their families in these very traditional ways. And one of the things that I said in this conference, in my presentation, was the thing that struck me about going to lunch and talking about my book with these men was that the number one thing that I heard from these guys, who you would think of as classic industrial breadwinners, was that they were deeply concerned about the state of the world and its future for their kids. And that part of the reason that they had done what they had done in their lives, worked for the military, been on maritime engineers, had built bridges, et cetera, architects, made millions in some cases. One of the reasons that they did that was to secure a safer future for their families. And what I did was, at this conference, was I talked about how I got really interested in that very localized caring aspect of these individuals. And these two colleagues of mine arced up and said, I don't want to let them off the hook. I don't want to give them any excuse. I want to make them bad and wrong. And I absolutely agree with that in principle, that we ought not let bad actors off the hook. And my response to those individuals was, I'm wondering about your relationship with your father and your grandfather back home. And do you want to actually have a relationship with them, or do you want to be right? And sometimes when there's a tension between staying in relationship and being righteous, it's a question of finding an intelligent way to reach the peace in the person and believe that it's still there, that they too are caring, even if they're doing terrible things. And to go working towards finding a way to reach that peace in them, that gem in them. Now, I don't profess that that ought be the work for all of us. So, for example, I would not expect for a woman who had been raped by men to have any patience or tolerance to men's sexual objectification of women. But I, who had not been raped by a man, I've had my own issues around sexual abuse as a child. But I'm in a better position to be able to have a conversation with, or find ways to build a relationship to actually move at least some of those individuals towards a more broadly caring aspect, because it's in them. And we must not forget that, in my view. And not let them off the hook. It's both.
I totally agree. And we are coming to the end, but I really want to do a question about that, because that's it. We know that the hegemonic masculinity, like we benefit from that, like we men. So we have many privileges, but as we work with men, and when we look to our own history, I also have like history of my father, my grandfather. We know that that's not easy. That's like hard. We take a loss on that too. And we can identify that in other men, although they behave like badly. We can see the suffering that they are carrying. And I also agree with you. Like it's easier for me than for my sister, my female friends to talk to men, to have the patience to listen and so forth. So how do we bring this, just to be in a nutshell, how do we bring these men, like the breadwinners, to the conversation? And do you have any insights in that? And also, how can the book help? Like, how can they see that ecological masculinities can help them, like, care for their families, considering the future of the planet? How can the book help in that way?
Yes. Okay. So we are also, in addition to theorizing, we've developed an education material which is freely available. And if I get a second before we sign off, I'll drop it in the chat so people can copy it. That is a PDF, and there's a series of 8 call them activity events that you can organize. We are in the process of transforming that into what we refer to as a version 2.0, or an ecosystem of interventions. And that ecosystem of interventions is designed for people to use as more like an ecosystem, like as a mosaic in their particular contexts, to try embodied exercises. So the key thing that I found that's been instrumental in bringing as many industrial breadwinners and eco-moderns over to ecologization has been to actually get out of the mind as much as possible. And that requires using educational approaches that are more embodied. And so the 3 big influences for me with that has been theater for the oppressed, Paulo Freire, theater, social presencing theater, which is from the Presencing Institute, Otto Schama, and then playback theater has also been quite influential. And the 4th influence that I would mention, which I'm sure some of your listeners will know about, is project management through a tool called Dragon Dreaming, which was developed by my dear mentor and colleague John Croft, also from Perth, Western Australia. Yay us, right? And John Croft's development of Dragon Dreaming gives us a frame for developing really caring projects for the planet to help widen that out. And so I'll put both the link for the education material for the masculinities ecologization process, remembering that that's just version 1, and we're changing that to be applicable to all people, non-binary folks, women, men, mixed groups, individual groups. And that's not come out yet. And then also I'll put the PDF in for John Croft's Dragon Dreaming handbook. So those would be really tactile and very tangible things that your listeners can get hold of. And then, of course, call on Martin and I to help. I mean, we're available to mentor, exchange. We learn a lot from people from different parts of the world as well in localizing this work. It's not ours. It's for us to shepherd or to support others to personalize and localize.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much, Paul, for your generosity and the work that you are doing. That's very, very important. I really admire that. And so we are in the end. I just wanted to give you some time if you want to add something that I didn't ask and you wanted to compliment, if you want to say a final words.
Yeah, just make sure I get this.
The links.
I'm just going to find these links for you. Just give me a moment to find them, actually.
Okay, no problem.
I didn't have them right at my fingertips. Hang on. Okay, there it is there. Okay, here's the Dragon Dreaming handbook for John Croft's work. And for our work, where is that? Bookmarks. Yes. And then Men in the Climate Crisis.
Oh yeah, I took a look at that one. Yeah, Martin sent us. Perfect.
Great. But other than that, just to say thank you very much. An absolute delight.
Oh, I thank you. That was really a pleasure, and I learned a lot. And I wish we could have more time. Maybe we'll meet again soon in the future, and we have other meetings. And the book will be launched here, published here. So we'll gather and make people join together to discuss and make groups, and also enter in contact with you guys and try to get some tips.
Wonderful. I look forward to it.
Yes. Isabel, do you want to say something before we close? Isabel, você quer?
Sim, eu queria agradecer mais uma vez a presença de vocês e convidar e já deixar o nosso encontro marcado para o dia 11 de agosto, para a gente voltar para um outro encontro, que é a nossa conferência, em que vai estar o Paul, o Martin e mais convidados. E com certeza o Luiz também, né, Luiz?
Great. Yes, I look forward to being on screen with Martin at the same time. That'll be a real honor.
Yeah, that'll be awesome. I'm looking forward for that.
Yeah.
So, okay, thank you, Paul.
Okay.
Thank you for your time, for your work and your generosity.
Pleasure.
I hope
all
to
the best
see you.
And, yeah, and do call on us. I'll pop my email in here as well.
Perfect.
Let me see if it'll do it that way. Australia.com. Yes. Okay. And just shoot me an email. Anyone who's on the call, I'm really happy to help and support you in any way I can.
Nice. And if you have any plans to come into Brazil, just let us know too.
In fact, I do. So, like I've got a dear friend there that I want to come and visit. So I will let you know.
Perfect. Nice.
Okay. Lovely.
So, okay. Bye-bye. Thank you for your time.
Okay. Take care. Thank you so much. A real honor. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.